want to continue with the issue of the nature of halacha. What we spoke about last time was that it's important to understand that even when we read a code, such as the Shulchan Aruch or the Rambam or whatever, Mishnah Torah, the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, or the Shulchan Aruch or whatever, which are written as codes, and they seem to be very similar to, let's say, a code written by a government, like the Criminal Code of Canada,
right,
where it just states laws and so forth and so forth. There's a major distinction. Codes written by governments, like the Criminal Code of Canada, was the product of legislation. The Parliament created these laws, and this is the law. The thing is that every code within Torah is not really a code. It was really the product of a judicial determination. The Torah states some laws and so forth and so forth. There was all Torah Shabbat Peh with it and so forth and so forth. And part of the process was immediately what I termed as judicial. Trying to see how the concepts, and the Torah really gave over a lot of concepts, would apply in very specific situations. And what occurred is almost every statement you make, let's say even in the Mishnah, first Mishnah, Me'emes Haikorin is Shema Ba'arvis. When do you say Shema at night? It's Ba'chalkes. Whether it's a third of the night, or you say all night, or half the night. What happened is different Rabbanim, given the various information they had and so forth and so forth, made different judicial interpretations. Okay, there wasn't a statement, there was information, and they came to a conclusion. This is what I think that means. So, for example, it says Shachva Kamecha, when you lie down or whatever. The one Tana in the Mishnah is saying that's when you go to bed. That's only in the first third of the night. Another Tana says no, all night you may go to bed. Okay, but the fact is when they make a statement that you have to say Shema, you have all night to say Shema according to that Tana. He's making a judicial statement. He made a determination based upon the concepts and ideas that he has. That's the Mishnah, okay, which may look as a statute, but the fact it brings down machlokes. When the Rambam wrote his code, he was challenged extensively because he didn't present down the different opinions and so forth. He wrote as this is the law. And a lot of his contemporaries got very upset with him about that, because that's your opinion of what the law is. But
they say he was Rambam, he wasn't some stum person.
No. The fact of the matter is people got upset with him. The Rabbi who got upset with him, those people who the Rabbi
was greater than the Rambam?
Right? A lot of people, who? Right?
Was the Rabbi greater than the Rambam?
That's a lot of people say yes. You're not talking about. How can you make? I have no way of knowing who's greater than the Rabbi and the Rambam. But the point is, there are people who say the Rabbi may have been greater than the Rambam. But the fact is, you're talking about two major Rishonim.
Yeah.
So the Rabbi's argument with the Rambam was, this is your judicial determination. You should give over the perception that was judicial interpretation. It was your conclusion based upon information. Other people will come to a different conclusion. You're not the legislature. You're not stating the law. You are making a determination based over. Therefore, the code should have been written in a way that shows that is the result of analysis and conclusions. This is something that Torah did. The next major code in Jewish law was written in such a way that Rabbi Yaakov Turin, basically he'll quote down different opinions and he'll say, I'll conclude the halacha is like this. Or my father said this, which his father was the Rosh, and I agree, I'm following my father. But the fact is, if you read the Torah, it's very clear that the Torah is stating, this is my conclusion. When the Shulchan Aruch was written, Beis Yosef But in fact, he brings down variant opinions. In fact, he says sometimes people say this, sometimes people say that. But he went back to the idea of much more of a simpler code, and that was because he felt that people needed to know this is what you have to do, this is what you have to do. But right away, when he did that, right, Moshe Isserles, who was a contemporary, said, "Listen, that's good in your place, but we in Europe, we decided differently." And therefore, right away, he wrote an addendum to the Shulchan Aruch that said basically, "Listen, this is your viewpoint. We have decided this law differently here because it was all judicial determination."
That's the graph?
That was the Moshe Isserles, the Ramah. Okay? Now, the fact is that what developed is like this, that the Rambam, interestingly enough, while he tried to simplify it, the truth is that because he didn't explain any of his reasoning and so forth, it created a whole world of study based upon the Rambam. So all the commentaries of the Rambam are trying to figure out how the Rambam learned the Gemara. So the point is from the Rambam there's a tremendous amount of learning, which really it's really opens up a whole perspective on analysis and so forth, because people are saying, where did the Rambam get it from? Because he didn't himself state it. Okay. The fact is, though, is when the Shulchan Aruch wrote his conclusion, the Ramah wrote his conclusion, what happened is that there was a certain narrowing of what became acceptable within the spectrum of halachic possibility. Halacha, being a world of judicial determination based upon the information that you have, becomes a world of opinions, of ideas, and so forth and so forth. And the posek, the one who makes a decision, looks back on this world and makes a judicial determination of what is the law, what he thinks the law should be. And that involves a determination of the facts and a determination of the application of the law, which means he looks at the various opinions of the law in the past. Up until the Shulchan Aruch, you had at the time of the Mishnah there was also a broad amount of information, and the Mishnah sort of narrowed it down and said, listen, from here on in, we're making a decision that we're only going to work within these parameters of the law. Perhaps the most famous example for that is Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai presented the spectrum of the law that includes variant opinions between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai.
But doesn't it necessarily their rationale of where they get it from?
No, but the fact is the Gemara develops it, a lot of arguments, but it came to...
Torah Shabbat Peh, that then turned into what?
No, Torah Shabbat Peh is still the process of information, but what happens was...
What's information?
Information that existed to defend the conclusions in law and a lot of the reasons for those conclusions.
Which is the Mishnayos, or it was...
Mishnayos and Gemara. But you see, what happens is some things are presented as statements. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai state halachic distinctions. Then there's the work to figure out what's their reasoning, how they got it, what's the theory behind their arguments.
Right.
And that you'll find some reasons presented in the Gemara and so forth and so forth. That's part of what learning is about. There's learning. What happens is you have statements, and then learning is the attempt to understand some of the statements. Sometimes sometimes the information that you're given is the analysis itself. And there was a whole variety of information that's given. What happened was like this. You have this body of information, and in this body of information was a presentation of two different opinions between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, right? And both of those opinions were considered to be part of the corpus of halacha, of acceptable halacha, of acceptable information for determining the halacha. Good. Then it came to a point where a decision was rendered that we are going to follow the opinions of Beis Hillel. Okay? Generally. And what happened is that decision that we're going to follow the decisions of Beis Hillel was not just a temporal decision. It wasn't just a decision that was said by one Bezdin or by one court saying, hey, I'm paskening like this, or we're paskening like this. Next generation can pasken like that, but we're paskening like this. Okay. So you see this all the time. Like one Rav paskened one way, and then another Rav comes about and says, okay, that was his psak, now I can pasken differently. But what happened with Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is when the decision was rendered that it's not just we're paskening like Beis Hillel, we're basically narrowing down what is acceptable in terms of the acceptable corpus of thought for halachic psak into the future. Okay? Now, an example is this: what the Mishnah did. There was a tremendous amount of Torah and so forth and so forth. And Yehuda Nasi and the Sanhedrin, his Bezdin, basically said, into the future, we're going to only follow this opinion. This is going to be the opinion into the future that's going to be followed as halacha. Okay? The other opinion, while it's in there in the books, and it's an acceptable opinion, that will no longer be an acceptable opinion into the future. Let me give you an example. There's a shita there's a machlokas like this. There's a machlokas by Mila. Okay? Okay? We hold that Mila is Doiches Shabbos.
Right.
Okay? The only thing that's actually Doiches Shabbos, the only thing that actually overrides the laws of Shabbos is the actual Meister Mila, the actual cutting, and therefore, which is a Meister of perfection. So that act itself is a malacha on Shabbos, but it's permitted. Okay. What about if you didn't have the knife that's necessary for the Mila, and that knife is in Rishus Rabbim and you're Rishus Yachid? So if you don't, so the only way you can do a Mila is by being Machal Shabbos and carrying. So there is a shita, Rabbi Elazar Mila says that that anything that's necessary for the Mila is Doiches Shabbos. So therefore you can go carry the knife from Rishus Rabbim to Rishus Yachid if it's necessary for a Mila. Okay. That's his opinion. The opinion, the other opinion, which is actually what became the halacha into the future, is no, you can't do it. If the night for Mila is Rishus Rabbim, you just can't do the Mila, because that action of Malacha on Shabbos is not Doiche Mila. Now, what happened is there was a time period in Jewish history you had these variant opinions. One Tana paskin one way, one Tana paskin another way. This was it, and so forth and so forth. And the Tana who paskined that it's not, that I think it's Rabbi Elazar said that it is Doiches Shabbos. For him, it was a totally halachically acceptable psak. In fact, there's a Gemara that goes on that in his city there was a big gzera against Mila and so forth. So it didn't apply to his city. And the fact is, even though the city had this opinion in halacha that it was okay to carry on Shabbos for Mila, the fact is, since it was the psak of the Rav in that city and so forth and so forth, it was an acceptable opinion. They were considered to be exempt from they were Kodesh Baruch Hu exempted them from being affected by the gzera against Mila. It's like they were okay because they followed a totally accepted halachic position. Because the halacha did not become fixed into the future. When Rabbi comes around, the Mishnah comes around, there was a fixing of the law into the future. So right now, if a person said, I think it's okay to carry from Rishus Rabbim to Rishus Yachid for Mila, and I'm going to follow the position of Rabbi Elazar in the Mishnah, that's not acceptable. Because his position, while it was a halachic position that could be used back then, there came a time in Jewish law that it became fixed. This will be that only that the laws that would be accepted to be used into the future became somewhat narrower and fixed.
And they could do that.
And so the question is, the Mishnah could do that. Okay, and the question is why they could do that and so forth and so forth. It seems to be because it was the decision of the Sun Jun with Rabbi. so forth. And that decision seemed to also apply when the Gemara concluded that the Gemara that the Gemara also fixed certain rules and said, into the future we're following these opinions, and these other opinions, while it was acceptable in the past, will no longer be acceptable opinions in the future.
What's the don't pass according to the Gemara?
No, you can't make determinations based upon just the language of Gemara. You have to learn it through with Rishonim and Achronim,
right.
And then you have to know what positions of the Gemara became fixed into the future.
Right.
Okay, so the point is that those opinions.
So there was a fixing at some point.
There was a fixing at the end of the Mishnah, and there was a certain, and this fixing was a narrowing of acceptable opinions that happened with the Gemara. Now the truth is why did that happen is a whole other topic. Okay, the whole issue of what happened, how they had the ability to do that. But that happened with the Gemara, that certain opinions that existed, in like for example, there's certain opinions that there was machlokas in the time of the Gemara and so forth and so forth. But now we say this is the law. Okay, so the opinion that was an acceptable opinion in, let's say, 250 CE, and the Rabbanim would paskin with that opinion. No, when the Gemara finalized the law, somehow they did some finalization of the acceptable opinions for future determination of the law. So there's a spectrum of halacha, and it became narrowed down to what would be acceptable for psak into the future. Beis Shammai was part of the greater thing. Then we want to go with Beis Hillel now, and this happened with other cases, and into the future it continues on. Okay, so that happened at the end of the Mishnah, happened at the end of the Gemara. It also happened with, and now why that happened becomes a discussion of what authority they had. With Rabbi, it was a decision of the Sanhedrin. Questions how the Sanhedrin could do that. There's questions like that. At the Gemara, there was other issues and so forth. I think there's one person who says it's because we don't really have the methodology of how, like, we don't really understand the methodology of drush anymore. I think I saw one opinion that says, like, for example, we do drushes, okay, because of an extra letter we have a halachic conclusion. The problem is how do we know that this letter means this halachic conclusion, not a halachic conclusion, right? How do we make that? Because we don't know how drushes really work. So therefore, that science of drusha was lost, and therefore we can no longer be involved in the Gemara discussions of drushas, and therefore we have to we have to follow the conclusions they have, because we no longer have any knowledge of that science of drushas. That's one argument I saw. But the fact is that there was a concluding aspect of what became acceptable, the acceptable spectrum for future determination of law in the future. And then, of course, the law then expands. You go through the Rishonim, you have Machlokes Rishonim, what the Gemara meant, so forth and so forth and so forth. What happened was with the Shulchan Aruch is you had another narrowing down of what's acceptable. So when it says we paskin like the Shulchan Aruch now, like people say we have to hold like the Shulchan Aruch, it doesn't mean you have to follow the actual conclusion of the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch was Rav Yosef Karo's determinations of conclusions, and what happened was that the Ramah immediately said, here we Ashkenazim, we have different conclusions. So some people will say, well, it means the Sfarim had to follow the Psak Halacha of the Shulchan Aruch, and the Ashkenazim had to follow Psak Halacha, the thing, and that was it, and therefore we had to follow their conclusion. But the fact is, what the Shulchan Aruch really did was it created another narrowing of acceptable opinions. What came from the Shulchan Aruch, and this is where the Shulchan Aruch is not when we talk about Shulchan Aruch, we're not just talking about the Beis Yosef, Yosef Karo and the Ramah. We're also talking about the major Nosei Kelim, the major commentaries. So when you talk Shulchan Aruch, you're talking the Shach, you're talking the Taz, you're talking the Nagon, you're talking Rabbi Kiva Eger, and then you're talking Aruch Shulchan, you're talking different things like that, and you're talking Piskei Tshuva, and you're talking other commentaries on Shulchan Aruch. What happened was though, is that, and then there's still Shas and Tshuvas Sfarim and so forth. But what happened was, is that somehow the Shulchan Aruch created a narrowing of the opinions that would be accepted into the future. Okay? So that before the Shulchan Aruch, a posek may have the right to look at any Rishon's opinion and make determinations like that and so forth and so forth. After the Shulchan Aruch, it seems to be that it became sort of a funnel and said it has to somehow go through the discussions that somehow tie into the Shulchan Aruch. Okay? That somehow follow through to what became the new parameters of acceptable psak. So, for example, I once had a shaila, and I was trying to figure out an argument, and I saw Tosfos, and Tosfos said something, and I said, gee whiz, I felt there was a need to try and be mocking this, and so forth and so forth. So, the fact is, I saw an opinion in Tosfos, and I said, maybe this is an opinion to use, and so forth and so forth. And then I worked out a strong argument to be mocked or something based upon an opinion in Tosfos. Tosfos is a pretty powerful Rishon, and so forth. And then I saw in Reb Moshe that he worked out the exact same argument in Hecht, but he says we can't rely upon this Tosfos anymore. In other words, this is not within the parameters of the information that we can now work with in terms of psak.
So was Reb Moshe narrowing?
No, Reb Moshe was saying the Shulchan Aruch already narrowed it.
Okay.
Okay, that's a narrowing from when Reb Moshe makes that statement. He's arguing that there's a narrowing of what is acceptable. There was a narrowing of what is acceptable opinions that we could work with in terms of as psak goes into the future. And the Shulchan Aruch became a certain point of narrowing, where when we talk about what the Shulchan Aruch says, it doesn't mean what the Shulchan Aruch really stated itself. It means that there's a certain study system or a certain body of knowledge or a certain body of analysis that somehow goes through the funnel of the Shulchan Aruch. So when you talk about psak halacha nowadays, it might be the Shach or the Taz disagreed with the Ramah. It might be so it's not monolithic, but it is somewhat narrowed from the wide possibilities of having access to all the Rishonim. In other words, what happens is a body of information. Now that body of information is still part of Torah. It's still part of the study of Torah. Right? It's still part of the theoretical study of Torah. But what happens is in the body of study that's tied to psak, that body of study of what's acceptable in future determination of psak had certain narrowing points in history. The Shulchan Aruch was one such narrowing point, where it said all the possible ideas that existed as part of Torah before are not all available in the future determination of psak. But it still has to recognize that you're still talking psak. You're still talking judicial determinations. You're still talking analysis. You're still talking making decisions. Post Shulchan Aruch, what we have available to us is a certain spectrum of the opinions and ideas that we can work with in psak. The truth is that, just to the aside, one of the leading conservative, let's say, legal authorities, Joel Roth, he wrote in Commentary, which is the Yeshiva University undergraduate newspaper. And they asked him a question, so they asked him what's the difference between conservative and orthodox. And his argument was that we in the conservative movement never accepted the limitations of having to go through the Shulchan Aruch. So he argued, and this is the more right-wing conservative. It exists less and less so nowadays, because the conservative movement is, even within their own arguments, are less halachic and so forth. But what Joel Roth argued was that the conservative movement's distinction from orthodoxy was that it didn't accept the narrowing down of possible opinions that's defined by the Shulchan Aruch. Therefore, they would pull a an opinion of a Rishon, that was an opinion of a Rishon, and said, okay, we can paskin like this Rishon, even though it was a singular opinion, and not, it wasn't brought down in any discussions from a Shulchan Aruch perspective and so forth and so forth. They say we can still go with it, but Orthodoxy said, listen. But it wasn't just the fact; it was also the conservative relied upon any. What they relied upon as any opinion. In actual Orthodox psak, it's not just any opinion. You have to have some reason why this opinion. But the fact is that it does. The Shulchan Aruch did say, listen, the theory of the narrow Shulchan Aruch through what Joseph Karo did and so forth was that he said, listen, we've got to work within these parameters in terms of future psak. But what was key, though, it's still a body of knowledge. Right. The Shulchan Aruch is not a legislative document.
Right.
It's not stating, here is the law. It's stating that based upon, okay, let's say if you want to look at Rabbi Yosef Karo, Yosef Karo wasn't a legislator. He said, here's the law. He was saying, based upon my understanding of the spectrum of opinion of Torah and opinions, I've come to the conclusion that judiciously I've come to the conclusion that this is what you should do.
This is coming from which sefer says this?
No, this is what this is what the Shulchan Aruch is. I mean, it's not. It's not a sefer who says this. This is what I mean. I'm telling you what like.
Right. You know, because when you're challenged, you make these statements, then you're like, well, who said that? How do you know that?
I mean, this is what it was. I mean, Yosef Karo basically said it.
Right.
He said how he made his decisions. He said, listen. He looked at the Rishonim and he came to a conclusion.
So there was never a time when the Klal Yisrael then said that we accept the narrowing of Shulchan Aruch?
No, the fact is that that's exactly the argument that happened. The argument is the argument why it was accepted is because Klal Yisrael basically accepted that narrowing.
According to who?
Basically, that's the opinion of most poskim. That's basically the opinion of Orthodoxy today, that the Shulchan Aruch basically was accepted by Klal Yisrael, that psak will develop within its parameters.
So if we're Orthodox Jews, how do we hold? How can we say that we don't accept the fact that Shulchan Aruch is the... Because
the understanding of what Shulchan Aruch is not the book. It's not the conclusion per se of Rabbi Yosef Karo. That's the point. It's the fact that, you see, Yosef Karo wrote a book called the Shulchan Aruch. Wrote a sefer called the Shulchan Aruch. Immediately, in the same time period, Moshe Isserles wrote an addendum to it and say, hey, we in Ashkenaz argue differently against it. Now, at the time the Shulchan Aruch came out with his code, which again has the problems of being a code, because it's not a legislative document, it's him making his conclusions without explaining his conclusions.
Yeah.
There were major achronim who basically said this is wrong. Anytime you want to tell me a psak, I want to know your reasons for it.
Yeah.
So the Marshal, right, major commentary on Shas, his Yam Shel Shlomo was basically saying, listen, you want to tell me psak? Give me the reasons for it, because you're making judicial determination. Right. It's like Lahabdil, when the U.S. Supreme Court comes down with a decision, right, someone writes an opinion.
Right.
You don't just say, "Here's the law." You're not the legislature.
Right.
This is your decision.
So, what about issues like snua?
These are all issues. These are all issues, and the fact is, Shulchan Aruch makes a statement of a psak.
Right.
Conclusion. The fact is, he doesn't give it around. The truth is, it's a little bit different because in the Beis Yosef, which is extensive commentary on the Torah, he gives his reasonings and his ideas. So the fact is, the difference between him and the Rambam is that we know what the Beis Yosef thought because we read his Beis Yosef.
Right.
Okay, and any person really studying Shulchan Aruch already, has studied through the Beis, looks at Beis Yosef. Right. So we already know what the Beis Yosef was thinking. But the fact is, he wrote a conclusion in law. The Ramah wrote back and wrote his conclusion in law, which was different than the Beis Yosef right off the bat. But here you see two different opinions, already transmitted at the same point in time. Don't forget, the Ramah also wrote Darchei Moshe on the Torah also. Right. So and he also wrote Charles and Shuvah's form. They both wrote Charles and Shuvah, so we know their analysis. What happened is that there are other people. It was just overnight. It wasn't, we're accepted overnight. And there's other people who basically argued against it. The Maram in Prague was very unhappy with the Shulchan Aruch. He says, listen, psak demands analysis. You have to know the reasons for it. So what happened is that a body of knowledge developed of commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch to explain the reasons of the Shulchan Aruch, disagreeing with the Shulchan Aruch, and so forth. But what occurred is when we start talking about that we now work with the narrowing of the Shulchan Aruch, it doesn't mean we now follow the psak of the Beis Yosef or the psak of the Ramah. It means that somehow the discussion of the halacha went through this channel of the Shulchan Aruch. And that this was somewhat of a narrowing process of what would be acceptable opinions into the future, into the future analysis of psak. Eventually, this happens over time, and the point is that halachic discussion became narrowed. Okay, now so therefore, 500 years later, when you look at making psak decisions, you don't go back all the way to the Rishonim and say I can pull this Rishon out of a statement, because the fact is no, we do know the Rishon will give his argument, so forth and so forth. The fact is now it has developed that the continuation of the halachic discussion works within the parameters of the Shulchan Aruch, whatever those parameters are. It's not just his statements, it's the body of discussion that existed within the commentaries
within the Shulchan Aruch. So the discussion of the Shulchan Aruch is the narrowing that we have accepted.
Right.
But but also Karo isn't necessarily
the fact that it's
not even the Ramah is fully accepted.
Right. Okay, now the fact is, and you have discussions and so forth and so forth. Then you have machlokas. I saw today machlokas between the Shach and the Beis Yosef, and most people pass like the Shach.
What does that mean? Most people paskin like a shach. Like, who's the one who decides that most people paskin? Who's most people?
You look up at what most people say. Most people means someone looked through what different people say, and different people said the shach's right.
All right. So, like an example, like snua. Like apparently, like there's a varying of opinions. Gemara has some very specific. What do you call it? Points of what snua is. You know, the Shulchan Aruch has very specific points apparently what snua is.
And what exactly do you mean?
Okay, so what people like there's and then there's so like the whole thing below the knee, above the knee, and.
Okay, so the fact is the argument is when it says the knee, okay, there's an issue. I mean, the people say below the knee means you gotta make sure it's covered even when they're sitting. So therefore, if you just have it at the knee, when a woman's sitting, it won't be covering the knee.
Yeah.
Other people say, because there's other arguments that say that a tepech off the boundary is okay.
Yeah.
So it's like so many of these things is you have to see the entire context.
Right.
The argument about above the knee or whatever has a lot to do with tepech above the knee. Now this leads to another question. When the Gemara makes a statement about the knee, what's it basing its statement on?
Right. So
the point is it basing a statement on some statement that it's the knee, or it's based upon its statement that since the general world covered the knee, that becomes knee. But if people stop covering the knee, maybe it's no longer the knee.
Right.
Like for example, the ankle. When people would cover the ankle, then you had to cover the ankle, right? But then when people stopped covering the ankle, thank you, then you didn't have to cover the ankle anymore. It's fine. The point is that see so much comes down to whenever you read a statement, what it comes down to is any statement is the result of the law and the facts. Okay? So when you read a statement, you have to understand, is the statement telling you this is the law, the legal theory, or is the statement telling you this is the legal theory applied to these facts, but if the facts change, the law will change because the legal theory is a little bit more narrow. Like for example, let's take the Aruch Shulchan statement about saying Krishma in front of a woman whose hair is not covered. So the halacha specifically was you shouldn't say Krishma in front of a woman's hair is not covered. What the Aruch HaShulchan says, what's the real law? What's the real legal principle? You can't say Kriya Shema in front of something that will generally cause sexual arousal, right?
So if you're in a school where you can look across the beam, right.
So, but if you're in a society where women aren't covering their hair, and therefore there's no sexual arousal from seeing women covering their hair, maybe it's okay to say Kriya Shema in front of a woman whose hair is not covered. What happened with that? So
it's just gray hair.
Yeah, you see, what comes down to is the fact that there's a law.
There's other parts people are looking at.
There's a law that says you can't. There's a law that says this is exactly it. This is why it's a judicial statement. Judicial statement becomes a understanding of the law, giving the facts based upon the determination.
Right.
So you have a law that says, don't say Kriya Shema in front of a married woman whose hair is not covered. Okay. Good. Okay. The argument, though, is that the real legal principle is not you can't say Kriya Shema in front of a woman's hair is not covered. No. The real legal principle is you can't say Kriya Shema in front of something that could be sexually arousing. Now, if women uncover their hair, and therefore hair not being out is no longer sexually arousing.
Women are sexually arousing regardless.
What?
Women are sexually arousing regardless.
Yeah, it's something different. Then there comes another issue. Then you can't say Kriya Shema in front of any woman, right? Okay. I mean, the fact is that, by the way, that's part of the same issue. The point is that it knows what really is the legal principle,
right? And
then how does that legal principle work with the facts?
Right.
The Shulchan Aruch, being a code, was a determination of Yosef Karo was making factual statements, which is his understanding of the legal principles as it relates to the facts. It's making legal conclusions. The point is we have to make those kinds of understandings. Like, for example, let me give you an example. I'm just looking at today. Someone asked me a question about shaking a woman's hand. Okay? Can you shake a woman's hand? If a woman puts her hand out to you, can you shake it? Now, most people think it's a very simple answer that you can. The truth is, it's not such a simple answer. It's actually it's actually a big issue. Ramosha basically says no, you shouldn't shake a woman's hand. Okay? Okay, so even if he puts his hand out, you shouldn't shake a woman's hand. Now, in his discussion, he basically has an argument. So why is it that people who are basically from do shake a woman's hand? What's their possible argument?
Rabbi.
So he's saying, listen, let's understand. The prohibition is no prohibition of touching a woman. There's no prohibition of touching a woman, right? That's not a problem. If there's a real problem with touching a woman, then you can never have doctors treat women, because it's not always sakana sefashos. The only thing, and even if it's sakana sefashos, if there's a sexual issue, the arias issues are yered v'yavor. So it's like if you just say, oh no, there's a blanket law you can't touch women, right? Then you can never have a woman go to a male. Let's say a married woman could never go to a male doctor, even for life-threatening situations, because it's a riot, it's yered v'yavor. Okay, according to Rambam's point. Anyways, it's not so simple. But let's take that statement. Okay, so Ramosha argues, based upon the Shach, that the prohibition is in only if it is the touching has some aspect of what he calls chiba. In other words, the touching has some aspect of a closeness. It has a sexual side to it and closely so forth.
But is that like the natural urge of like anyone? Well, there's also like different.
That's okay. So let's deal with it. So the isser is you can't have touching that has this response that has an aspect of what's called chiba, which is some type of affection. Okay, or sexual affection. So therefore, when a woman goes to a doctor Doctor's professional. He's not thinking in terms of affection, something like that. He's just doing a medical routine. Therefore, he touch a woman because there's nothing to do with it. It's just okay. Because the problem is not touching a woman. Touching a woman is only a problem with chiba. Okay. So the point is the question that emerges. Okay. So is shaking hands with a woman
like an attractive woman?
Is that has something to do with chiba or not, or does it have something to do with the potential for chiba? Because if it has a potential, it may also be problematic. So Ramosha seems to take the position that there may be some aspects of chiba and so forth and so forth. Then that's why you shouldn't shake hands, because it could be. But he makes the same psak. He was asked the question once: Can you go in the subway in New York when it's rush hour and you might be pushed up against a woman? He says it's okay. Because that's nothing to do with chiba. It's just the way it's just trying to get to work. It's nothing to do with that sort. And if you tell me that you're actually feeling something, then it might be a problem for you to go. But maybe you should control yourself and not feel things like that, because you're just going in a subway.
So you can't control those things.
What? Who says that? Ramosha says you can control those things. Well, it might be difficult, but the fact is you can't control those things.
I mean, the thought you can't control the initial thought.
The fact is that Ramosha's, the argument of people who say it's okay to shake hands with a woman are basically saying because you can make sure you're not going to have this effect.
Right.
But if a woman that you're concerned about having an effect, that you will feel something because she's going to shake hands with you, you can't shake hands with her.
So if you're at like a business meeting and there is an attractive...
Yeah, you got a problem. You've got a problem. The fact is, you got a problem. The fact is, the problem might be is you can't control yourself. In other words.
Well, define controlling yourself.
You just shake hands with the woman and say, "Listen, this is just a business meeting. I have no feelings because of this."
So should you shake hands or not shake hands?
That's my focus.
So, Rabbi, I guess maybe some people are differently sensitive, but
what?
I mean, sometimes you just...
Yeah,
some people are more sensitive than others.
Right, and therefore you have to take into account. That's exactly it, and therefore you have to take...
So the initial thought, like, is...
So Ramosha says about traveling on the subway.
Like, you're not picking up the woman at the business
But he said, but that's not the point. The point is just even the actions. So Ramosha talks about going on the subway. He says basically you have to travel to work and it's okay. This has nothing to do with chiba. It's just basically you're stuck in like sardines going in the subway. But he says if you actually feel something and you sit there and saying, "Gee, I'm concerned I'm going to feel something," then maybe you can't go in the subway. And then you should think about that. Why you can't control yourself, and why you're concerned about that. The fact is that it becomes. You see, one of the things that happens is that people expect.
Complicated.
Yeah, no, it becomes very personal and very self. It becomes self-reflective. You don't have black and white statements. You have reflective and looking at yourself, and it also makes demands.
So, I mean, is their chiba more of an extreme, or is it more...
No, that's basically a halacha.
Like touching it, like a warm... I don't know, like there's...
The point is...
talking like if you don't feel anything and it is accepted...
Yeah, the fact is, the person I saw today said something interesting. He said the Ben Ish Chai, I think he says the Ben Ish Chai. Ben Ish Chai said that it was okay to, in certain countries when you see a woman you kiss her hand. So
yeah.
And that's the normal social practice, and it's okay. The point is, it depends upon your own, upon general society and so on and so forth. People don't. What I'm trying to say is that once you start getting into this realm, you begin to understand that it's not objective statements.
Right.
It's the statements that deal with the individual, deals with the circumstances and so forth. Any law that's stated, any code law that's stated, is a judicial determination based upon the legal principles and facts. And the fact is it has a lot to do with understanding the nature of the facts. And sometimes the facts are different because people are different.